The grand hall of the Galactic Council was a place of spectacle, a swirling storm of alien nobility clad in iridescent silks and armor forged from dying stars. The air shimmered with the heat of too many egos packed into one towering chamber, and the scent of burning incense barely masked the underlying scent of decay, the kind that came not from bodies, but from a society rotting from within. At the heart of it all stood King Arvek of the Zathar Dominion, his towering form wrapped in ceremonial regalia, golden eyes flickering with thinly veiled disgust. At his side, Princess Zyra stood still, her chin lifted high despite the whispered mockery slithering through the chamber. "She is unworthy," one of the counselors murmured, his forked tongue darting out in distaste. "A disgrace to the bloodline," another agreed. The murmurs did not faze King Arvek. He simply raised a clawed hand for silence before speaking, his voice carrying the weight of a decree that could not be undone. "My daughter, Zyra, has proven weak. She lacks the fire of our people, the ambition, the ruthlessness required to rule." He glanced at her, his gaze colder than the void between galaxies. "She will not inherit my throne. She will be given away, as is customary for those who bring shame upon our lineage." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly. No one expected the king to hand his daughter over to a noble suitor. No, this was an exile in disguise, a political disposal wrapped in the pretense of diplomacy. Zyra did not flinch, though something flickered behind her violet eyes, something dangerous. "And to whom do you sentence her?" the Galactic Chancellor asked, leaning forward with obvious amusement. King Arvek's lips curled into something resembling a smile. "To a human." Laughter exploded across the chamber. The humans, those stubborn creatures of Earth, newcomers to the galactic stage, were little more than brutes to the Zathar elite. Unrefined, inferior, unworthy. To hand the king's own blood to one of them? It was an insult so profound it bordered on genius. At that moment the doors to the chamber hissed open. A human stepped forward, the human in chains. Commander Elias Carter did not bow. He did not kneel. He did not even acknowledge the waves of laughter echoing off the obsidian walls. He walked with the unshaken arrogance of a soldier who had survived the worst the universe had to offer. His battle-worn jacket, still stained with the dust of 100 battlefields, bore no insignia, a mark of exile. His scarred knuckles flexed at his sides, and his dark, calculating eyes swept over the gathered nobles like a predator taking stock of prey. If the council expected Carter to protest his fate, they were sorely mistaken. Instead, he smirked. "That all?" His voice carried through the hall like a blade through silk. "I thought this was a punishment." The laughter stopped. King Arvek narrowed his gaze. "You mock me, human?" "I mock the idea that I should be insulted by a gift," Carter replied, his smirk unwavering. "From what I hear, your daughter was born with a backbone. Shame you never saw it?" Zyra's gaze snapped toward him, her expression unreadable. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. King Arvek's claws dug into the armrest of his throne, but he did not strike Carter down. No, that would be too merciful. Instead, he exhaled slowly, a predator savoring the moment before the kill. "Then take her," the king said smoothly. "Take this burden, this shame, and do with her as you will." Carter tilted his head. "No strings attached?" A chuckle. "Only one. If you fail to control her, I will ensure neither of you leave this sector alive." Carter met the king's gaze and, to the horror of every noble present, he laughed. Then he turned to Zyra. "Well, princess? Shall we go?" She said nothing. She did not lower her gaze, did not acknowledge his extended hand. Instead, she walked past him, her posture as regal as ever. The moment the two exited the hall, the council erupted into whispers. The warning. The warship was old, patched together from battles it should not have survived. Yet it hummed beneath their feet, engines vibrating with quiet strength. Zyra stood near the viewport, watching her father's empire shrink into the abyss. The only sign of her fury was the clenched fists at her sides. Carter leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed. "You're awfully quiet for someone who just got thrown to the wolves." Zyra's voice was a blade wrapped in silk. "I was given to a human. There are no wolves lower than that." Carter snorted. "You really know how to charm a guy." She turned then, and for the first time, he saw it, not just anger but defiance. A fire that had been smothered for too long. "Make no mistake, Carter." She stepped toward him, each movement deliberate. "I am not yours. I am not a burden. And if you think I will bow to you, you are sorely mistaken." His grin widened, all teeth and danger. "Good. I hate it when things are easy." Her eyes narrowed. "You think this is a game?" "No," Carter said, voice dropping. "I think this is the part where we both prove them wrong." She stilled. The words hung between them, charged with something more dangerous than hate, an understanding. Then the ship's alarm blared. "Incoming hostiles." Valkyrie, the ship's AI, spoke with alarming calm. "Commander, I hate to interrupt your bonding moment, but we've got company. Zathar warships. 3 of them." Zyra turned to the viewport and froze. "My father, he wouldn't send ships after us unless—" Carter's eyes darkened. "Unless what?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Unless he never meant to let us leave alive." Carter cracked his knuckles. "Well, guess it's time to see if you're as strong as they say, Princess." Zyra's lips curled into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You better keep up, human." The warship jolted as the first blasts hit. The warship lurched violently, its metal bones groaning under the impact of enemy fire. Sparks rained down from overhead panels as the dim emergency lighting bathed the cockpit in a crimson glow. Carter didn't flinch. He thrived in chaos. "Valkyrie, give me something," he barked, gripping the controls. 3 Zathar warships, fast interceptors. Heavily armed, lightly shielded, the AI responded. "They're cutting off all escape routes?" "Of course they are." Carter exhaled through his nose. This wasn't a chase, it was an execution. From the co-pilot's seat, Zyra sat rigid, her gaze locked onto the holographic display tracking the ship. Her jaw clenched, but her voice was steady. "My father never intended to let us go." Carter risked a glance at her. No panic. No begging. Just cold, simmering rage. He could respect that. "You called it, Princess," he said, pushing the thrusters to max burn. "Hope you're ready to get your hands dirty." Her violet eyes flashed. "I was born in fire, human. The question is, are you?" Carter grinned. Oh, he liked her. Dancing with death. The ship screamed through the void, dodging incoming plasma bursts with barely a breath to spare. Carter's hands moved on instinct, every maneuver calculated to thread them through the hailstorm of death. Zyra watched his every move, absorbing how he worked, the way his muscles flexed as he pulled the ship into a hard roll. He wasn't just reacting, he was controlling the fight. She'd been taught that humans were inferior, that they were crude creatures of impulse. Yet here he was, laughing in the face of death, treating the impossible like an inconvenience. "This ship isn't made for dogfights," she noted. "You're stalling." "Yeah, well," Carter gritted his teeth, pulling into a tight spiral. "I'd rather not get vaporized if that's all right with you." Another impact rattled the hull. A control panel exploded, sending a shower of sparks across the cabin. Zyra moved fast, too fast. Before Carter could react, she was at his side, pulling the auxiliary controls online. Her hands flew over the interface with a precision he hadn't expected. "You know how to fly?" he asked. She shot him a look. "I know how to survive." Carter's grin widened. Goddamn, he really liked her. The taste of power. As they dodged between enemy ships, Carter formulated a reckless, very human plan. "I need you to trust me for about 10 seconds, he said, flicking a switch that powered down their forward shield. Zyra's expression darkened. "That's suicide." "No, that's bait." Carter leaned in, his voice low. "They think you're weak. Let's prove them wrong." Her gaze locked onto his. Tension crackled between them, electric, volatile. Then, she nodded. Valkyrie chimed in. I do not condone this plan. Good thing I don't care, Carter muttered. He pulled the ship into a dead stop, letting the Zather interceptors close in. The lead ship took the bait, charging in for the kill. At the last second, Zyra struck. She extended her hands, and something ancient and unnatural surged beneath her skin. The ship's console hummed in response, systems flickering as if something, or someone, was interfering with them. The Zather warship never fired. Instead, it veered off course, its thrusters failing, systems going haywire. Like a marionette with its strings cut, it spiraled into the void, powerless. Carter's eyes widened. What the hell was that? Zyra didn't look surprised. She looked afraid. The other Zather ships hesitated, just long enough for Carter to finish the job. He reactivated the shields, diverted power to the rear thrusters, and punched the engine to full. They escaped the kill zone in seconds. Secrets we hide. Silence stretched between them, the warship now drifting safely in the quiet abyss of space. Carter turned his seat toward her. His usual smirk was gone. What did you just do? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Zyra didn't meet his gaze. Nothing. Try again. He leaned closer, his voice low, charged. Because last I checked, a Zather warship doesn't just shut down mid-flight unless someone rips the power from its bones. She remained still, her fingers digging into her palms. I don't know, she admitted. It's always been there, inside me. But my father feared it. Tried to suppress it. Carter processed this. She wasn't weak. She was dangerous. And the king hadn't abandoned her out of shame. He had exiled her out of fear. Zyra finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You wanted proof I wasn't weak, Carter. She exhaled slowly. You have it now. His gaze lingered on her, searching. For what? He wasn't sure. Then, he leaned back, hands behind his head. I like you, princess. She scoffed. I don't care. Liar. His grin returned, slow and knowing. For the first time since this mess began, she almost smiled. A king's fury. Before she could respond, Valkyrie's voice interrupted. Commander, we have an incoming transmission. The AI hesitated. It's from the Zather Royal Fleet? Zyra's face paled. Carter sighed. Well, that can't be good. Valkyrie's voice dropped. It's a message from the king. The screen crackled, then King Arvek's face appeared. His golden eyes filled with something Carter had never seen before. Not anger. Fear. His voice was slow, deliberate. You don't understand what you've taken, human. That girl is not my daughter. She is a mistake. A weapon. And if she unlocks what lies inside her, she will be the end of us all. The transmission cut. Silence. Carter turned to Zyra. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling at her sides. I don't know what I am, she whispered. Carter stood, stepping close. He should have been afraid. But he wasn't. Instead, he lifted her chin with 2 fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. You're not a mistake, he said simply. And if they're afraid of you, then it's about damn time you show them why. She inhaled sharply. Something in her shifted. A decision made. Then, her lips curled into a dangerous smile. Let's burn the throne down, Carter. The warship surged forward, toward war, toward vengeance, toward a destiny neither of them yet understood. The warship hummed with quiet menace as it cut through the endless void. The interior lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer than they should. The silence was thick, charged with unspoken tension. Carter sat in the pilot's chair, watching Zyra. She stood near the viewport, bathed in the cold glow of distant stars, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The revelation of her father's message still clung to her like a second skin. She wasn't just an unwanted daughter. She was something else entirely, a weapon, a mistake, a being powerful enough to terrify a war-hardened king. Carter exhaled through his nose. The girl who had just saved their asses with an impossible display of power was still trying to pretend she wasn't shaking. He wasn't buying it. So, he finally said, his voice breaking the quiet. How do you want to do this? Zyra turned slightly, arching a delicate brow. Do what? Take the bastard down, Carter replied, leaning back in his chair, boots propped against the console. We're not running, so that means we're fighting. And if we're fighting, we need a plan. Her expression was unreadable. Carefully controlled. I don't need your help, human. Carter's grin was slow, dangerous. That's cute, princess. But I wasn't asking. A flicker of something passed through her gaze. Annoyance, maybe? Amusement? He couldn't tell. But she didn't argue. Instead, she finally turned fully toward him, arms dropping to her sides. My father fears me, she admitted, voice low. But I don't know why. Whatever power I have, it's locked inside me. A shadow crossed her face. He made sure of that. Carter studied her for a moment. This wasn't just a mission for her. It was personal. She had spent a lifetime caged, ridiculed, discarded. And now, for the first time, she had a chance to burn the cage to the ground. But fear lingered at the edges of her expression. She wanted this, needed this, but part of her was still afraid of what she might become. Carter stood, closing the space between them. Not too close. Not yet. But enough to make sure she felt him there. Then let's break the lock. Her head snapped up, her eyes sharp. You think it's that simple? Everything's simple, Carter said. People just like making it complicated. She huffed a short breath, almost a laugh. Then the warship's alarm screamed to life. The betrayal. Valkyrie's voice cut through the air. Commander, we have an incoming transmission. Encrypted. Military grade? Carter's smirk faded. Who is it? A pause. Then Valkyrie answered. General Valor of the Zathar Dominion. Zyra stiffened. Carter didn't miss the way her fingers curled into fists. Valor. The king's right hand. His most trusted executioner. Carter exhaled sharply. Put him through. The holoscreen flared to life, revealing a figure clad in black battle armor, his reptilian features sharp and impassive. His yellow eyes locked onto Carter first, then flicked toward Zyra. His expression did not change. Commander Carter, Valor said smoothly. It seems you've taken something that does not belong to you. Carter crossed his arms. Funny. I seem to recall your king tossing her away like garbage. Valor did not blink. And yet you must know the truth by now. His gaze shifted fully to Zyra. You are not what you believe yourself to be, child. And if you continue down this path, the galaxy will burn for it. Zyra's hands trembled at her sides. Carter stepped in front of her. A small movement, but deliberate. You want to talk threats, General? He said, his voice darkening. Try me. Valor exhaled slowly. I am offering you a way out, human. Deliver her to me. Walk away. You do not understand what you are protecting. Carter chuckled, low and lethal. Buddy, I don't need to understand. All I need to know is that your king wants her dead. And if he's afraid of her, that means she's got something worth protecting. Zyra's breath hitched. Something shifted in her eyes. Something raw. Valor tilted his head. Then you are a fool. The transmission cut. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the ship's engines. Then Zyra exhaled sharply, stepping past Carter toward the control panel. We can't stay here, she said, her voice tense. If he's involved, the king isn't just afraid anymore. He's desperate. That means they're coming. Carter nodded, already moving to plot a course. Then she hesitated. Carter. He turned. She stood rigid, her back straight, but there was something different in her expression. No longer just anger. No longer just defiance. Something that looked an awful lot like trust. You could have taken his offer, she said quietly. Sold me out? Carter shrugged, smirking. I like pissing off kings. She shook her head. That's not why. For a second, Carter didn't speak. Then, softer than before, he said, No. It's not. A heartbeat of silence stretched between them. Charge. Heavy. Then Zyra turned back to the controls, voice steady. Where do we go? Carter smiled to himself as he keyed in the coordinate. Somewhere we can get ready. He locked in the final command. Somewhere we can end this. The warship surged forward, slicing through the darkness like a blade. To be continued. The warship descended through thick storm clouds, its hull glowing red from the heat of atmospheric entry. Below, the Zather capital stretched in all directions, a monstrous sprawl of obsidian towers and steel fortresses, a kingdom built on fear. The sky was filled with royal fleet ships, their sleek, blade-like silhouettes circling like vultures. The entire planet had been put on high alert. The king knew they were coming. Carter sat in the pilot's chair, hands steady on the controls. Well, princess, he muttered, looks like your father rolled out the welcome mat. Zyra stood beside him, her violet eyes locked onto the view outside. He's afraid? Carter flicked a switch, bringing up the landing trajectory. Yeah, well, I'd be afraid too if I had to face you. He grinned. Terrifying little thing like you? I'd run. She didn't laugh. Instead, she exhaled slowly, hands tightening at her sides. He won't run, she said. He'd rather die than admit he was wrong. Carter nodded. He understood that kind of man. Men like Arvek never surrendered, they only burned. Landing in the lion's den. The ship landed hard in the outer courtyard of the palace, its thrusters scorching deep scars into the black stone. Carter unbuckled his harness, checking his weapons. Zyra didn't move. She stood silent and still, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on her like a vice. Carter stepped beside her, voice quiet. You ready for this? She met his gaze. No. His smirk softened. Good. The moment you stop being scared is the moment you stop thinking. A pause. Then, her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Come on, princess, he said, stepping toward the exit. Let's go piss off a king. The doors hissed open. Outside, a full battalion of Zather soldiers waited, armored warriors, their weapons raised, their expressions unreadable behind black visors. At the head of them stood General Vaylor. You're making a mistake, Vaylor called, his voice like a knife scraping against stone. Carter cracked his neck. I make a lot of those. This one just happens to be my favorite. Zyra stepped forward, her chin lifted high. Where is my father? Vaylor's golden eyes locked onto hers. Inside. But this does not end the way you think it will, child. Zyra's expression didn't waver. No, she agreed. It ends worse. Then she moved, too fast for the soldiers to react. A blur of violet and gold as she raised her hands, and the world cracked open. Power unchained. A shock wave of energy erupted from her body, sending soldiers flying. Plasma weapons shorted out, armor malfunctioned, the ground trembled beneath their feet. For the first time in his life, Vaylor stepped back. Carter whistled. Well, damn. That's new. Zyra turned to him, her breath unsteady, her eyes glowing with a light that had never been there before. I can feel it, she whispered. Everything they tried to bury. Carter tightened his grip on his gun. This was it. No turning back. He jerked his head toward the towering palace doors. Then let's finish this. The throne room. The royal hall was vast, its black marble floors polished to a mirror sheen. Tall banners of the Zather sigil lined the walls, and at the far end of the chamber, seated on a massive throne of dark iron, was King Arvek. The man looked unchanged, cold, unmoving, drenched in quiet disdain. As Carter and Zyra approached, the guards flanking him did not move. No defense, no weapons raised, because the king did not need them. Zyra stopped just short of the throne, her voice sharp. You sent assassins after me? Arvek sighed as if bored. I sent warriors to correct a mistake. Zyra's hands trembled. You knew? Of course I knew, Arvek said, his golden eyes narrowing. You were never my daughter, Zyra. You were an experiment, a failed creation, a thing given form but lacking purpose. Carter's fingers twitched over his gun. Bastard. But Zyra didn't lash out. She just stared at him, unblinking, unbroken. Then I choose my own purpose, she said. Arvek smirked. Do you? Then he lifted his hand and the palace shook. The final test. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen energy. Carter felt it like pressure against his skull, a force he couldn't name. Zyra stumbled back, her eyes widening in shock. No, she whispered. Because the power she had felt within her, the power she had feared, the power she had just begun to understand, wasn't hers alone. It was his. Arvek stood from his throne, his form shimmering with raw energy. His voice echoed, layered with something inhuman. You thought you were special, he sneered. You thought you were more than what I made you? I am the source, child. You are nothing but a fragment of my will. Zyra cried out as the invisible force ripped through her, a tidal wave of raw agony. Carter moved without thinking. He caught her before she hit the ground, gripping her tightly. Too tightly. Like letting go would break her. Stay with me, princess, he muttered, shaking her. Look at me. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Arvek watched them with disinterest. I will take back what was mine. And then I will erase you both from existence. Carter's jaw clenched. Not happening. He looked down at Zyra, his grip tightening on her shoulders. You hear me? You are not him. You are not his mistake. You are not his weapon. Her violet eyes fluttered open. You are you. And you are going to get the hell up. The throne room crackled with tension. Then Zyra gritted her teeth, planted her feet, and stood. And when she did, her power surged. Stronger than before. Unchained. Free. Arvek's smirk vanished. For the first time, the king looked afraid. And Zyra? She smiled. Let's see who the real mistake is, father.